Greetings everyone! In this video, we'll get to the details of experimental design in the training and test section of an experiment in Enigma. This video will be a continuation of our previous videos introducing the process of creating an experiment, adding necessary text information, and organizing a stimuli list. Thus, we highly recommend you to go through the previous videos, especially the part related to stimuli list, which your experimental design largely depends on. Then you should catch on with the following content smoothly. Now, assuming you have followed our suggestion, we'll move on to the exciting part of building the core design in your experiment. Let's go! On the Manage Experiment page, click on your newly created experiment in the Inactive Experiment section, then open the menu and click on Training to enter the setup page for the training session. There are some settings that are only for the training session, which we'll point out below, but most of our tutorials apply to the experimental design in the training session as well as in the test session. If you're in the training section, the first thing you have to do is to consider whether you want to skip the training session for all participants in your experiment. This function is useful if you want to study participants' learning effect in a learning-on-the-fly context. That is, your participants will never be exposed to any training input. Instead, they will skip to a test session directly, in which they will learn to respond correctly with explicit feedback on their response accuracy in a piecemeal fashion. If this experimental design is what you need, check the Skip Training box, and you can move to the test section. Note that if you only require your participants to avoid repeating training sessions in their multiple participations, you need to uncheck the multiple training box and the basic info settings as we've explained in the previous video. Moving on, you will see the function for you to upload your stimuli list as we have explained in another video. We assume that you have already learned how to do this, so we'll skip this part. But feel free to click on the list instruction to review detailed text instructions. As you have uploaded your list successfully, the blocks should have been generated automatically based on the labels in the black column in your stimuli list. Remember, each block can only have access to the information of trials with its block label in the stimuli list. You can insert new blocks manually or delete existing blocks directly on this page unless you make changes to the block column in your stimuli list file. Now, if it is vital for your participants to be presented with blocks in a random order, you can check the Random Block Order box. If you decide not to order your blocks randomly, your blocks will be presented to the participants following the order appearing on the page from top to bottom. You can easily manipulate the order by clicking on up and down for each block. Here's another unique experimental setting for the training session, that is target accuracy. If you need your participants to complete some tasks with a specific accuracy rate for them to take part in the test session, then you need to check this box and set the threshold in percentage. This may be particularly important in an online language learning experiment because you want to make sure participants pay sufficient attention to the training process. Those who cannot pass the threshold will be forced to terminate their participation, and they will not be given a proof of completing your experiment. Enigma also offers a useful tool for you to monitor learners' attention to the training input, as we will explain toward the end of this video. After the above introduction, let's look into how to really design experimental blocks in Enigma. For each block, you can click on Edit to adjust block settings such as block title, which can be different from your block labels presented in the block label column for you to manage your experimental settings more easily. A block title has to be less than 20 characters. The number of repetition setting decides how many times a block is looped. And if you check Random Trial Order, the trials in this specific block will be presented in random order for each participant. Once you finish the settings here, Remember to click Update to store your settings temporarily. To really apply these changes, please click Save at the bottom of the page. Remember, if you leave the page without clicking Save, all the changes you've made will be lost. No one wants this to happen, right? Next, let's learn how to change the experimental design for each trial in a block. When you click on Add an element of a block, a new element will appear in a block, which by default is set to present a stimulus. Regardless of how many elements you have in a block, these elements represent the structure of a trial, and accordingly, all these elements can have access to trial information in the same row in your stimuli list. You can add up to 10 elements for each block, so you certainly have some room for creating a complex trial structure. Now, click on the element, and you can further edit element settings, and let's go through these settings one by one. You can give each element a straightforward title reflecting its function in a block by changing the element title column. The new title, though, cannot be longer than 20 characters composed of alphabets and digits. In addition, elements in the same block must not have the same title. Next, in the training session, there are two options in the setting element type. One is presentation and the other is random recall test. We'll start with the former to tell you how to set up an element for presenting stimuli, and we will come back later for the second type. First, you can decide when an element is initiated when it is processed in a trial by changing the element onset setting. If it's set to 0, the element will be initiated as soon as the element is processed. If the element is added to present a stimulus, an element onset of 0 means the stimulus will be presented to participants immediately. Otherwise, a length no longer than 3600 seconds in this column will create a delay in initializing an element. If you wish to have a variable delay length for an element in different trials, you can refer to the delay column by entering delay in double square brackets in this setting. In each trial, then, the delay will be set according to the value retrieved from the delay column of the stimuli list for the trial. After deciding when an element is initiated, you still have to decide how long the element will last after the onset of their initiation in the element length setting. The valid values for this setting ranges from -1 to 3600 seconds. If this element is set to present a text and an image stimuli, -1 means infinity for the length of the element, which does not terminate unless participants make a valid response. Alternatively, if the stimuli presented by an element are audios or videos, -1 means the element length will be identical to the length of the sound or video stimulus presented by the element. Furthermore, if an element does not present a sound or video stimuli, but you hope its presentation length could be synced with the length of the sound or video stimuli dynamically presented in each trial, you can simply enter the column name of the sound or video stimuli presented in another element in your stimuli list with double square brackets, such as audio URL. The next setting is stimuli type, which could be text, audio, video, or image. Depending on the type of stimuli, you can provide texts or URLs to present these different stimuli on the column below your type choice. If stimuli are loaded from your stimuli list, you can also enter the name of the column in double square brackets, such as audio URLs or text stimuli, into this column, so your stimuli will be loaded dynamically in each trial. Importantly, you have to make sure that a column includes stimulus information that is consistent with the type of your choice. If you put audio URLs into this setting with stimuli type set to be texts, then the URLs in the audio URLs column will be presented as pure texts rather than the sound files the URLs are linked to. You can also decide the visual stimuli's position relative to the center of the screen. In the stimuli position XY settings, the first column represents the x-axis and the second the y-axis. You can enter a number between -10,000 and 10,000 in each column to adjust the position of a visual stimuli. The number here means the proportion to the stimulus' own width or height. For instance, if x has a value of -50, then the visual stimulus will be moved from the center of the screen to its left by 50% of its width. If y has a value of -50, then the visual stimulus will be moved upward from the screen center by 50% of its height. The two columns are set to 0 by default, which position a visual stimulus at the center of the screen. Without saying, this setting is useless for audio stimuli. As in other settings, you can retrieve the by-trial information from your stimuli list by referring to the column name in this setting. If you wish to dynamically set the position of visual stimuli based on the values in the position X or position Y column in your stimuli list, enter position X in double square brackets or position Y in double square brackets in stimuli position XY. After deciding the relative position of visual stimuli, you may want to adjust the element order setting to fine-tune your trial structure. Multiple elements can have the same order so they are initiated at the same time. For example, if you want to present an audio stimulus and a text stimulus simultaneously, you can add two elements for presenting stimuli in the same block, one for audio stimuli and one for text stimuli, and assigning the same order number to both elements. In our experimental design interface, you will see that the two elements are aligned together. Of course, this does not mean that multiple elements are fully synced. You can still set these elements to have a different delay or length. It's just that these elements are processed at the same stage together and terminated at the same time if a response is collected by one of the elements and provided by a user, as we will explain below. An element is not only used to present a stimuli but can also be set to collect responses by checking the Collect Responses box. Once this setting is set, Enigma will automatically record the participants' responses and reaction times of valid responses. Note that when multiple elements have the same element order, only one of them can be set to collect responses. In addition, when a valid response is provided, all the elements of the same order will terminate altogether, and the experiment will move on. The time limit for providing a response is equivalent to the setting in the element length column. Once you click the Collect Responses box, you will see additional settings you may want to change as well. First, in response types and keys, you can choose between unary, binary, and 7-point Likert scale responses. Based on the response types you choose, you have to provide the corresponding response text prompts and keys in the second and the third column respectively. The response prompts will appear in response buttons that are only visible in the mobile interface, and the response keys will only be meaningful in the desktop interface. Since you don't know which kind of device your participants will use, you're required to provide both types of settings. When the response type is binary or Likert scale, you need to separate your response text and the response keys with a comma. For example, if the response type is binary, you can enter yes, no as the response prompts and A, L as the corresponding response keys. Response keys are generally limited to English alphabet A to Z and digits 0 to 9. But the space key could be used by entering space in the response key column. Then, you can choose to set a correct response in the correct column as the first step for Enigma to calculate response accuracy for you and your participants. It is very likely you need to set correct response keys dynamically by referring to the correct column in your stimuli list. In this case, simply enter correct in double square brackets in the correct response key column. Note that regardless of whether your correct response key is fixed or set dynamically, The correct response key must be among of the response keys you choose for an element. Finally, check the Check Response Accuracy box so Enigma can record response accuracy based on correct response keys. In the test session, there must be at least one element collecting and checking responses with correct response keys because that's how learning performance is assessed in test session. If response accuracy is checked by Enigma, you can also choose whether you'd like to give feedback on the accuracy of participants' responses. You can check the Show Response Feedback box and adjust the feedback texts and feedback length columns. In the feedback text column, you need to provide text prompts corresponding to correct and incorrect and separate them with a comma, such as the default prompts check and cross. Then, the number and the feedback length determines how many seconds the feedback will appear on the screen after a response or after the time limit. After you finish all the settings in an element, make sure that you click the Update button to save the settings of the element temporarily. Or, if you choose not to update the element settings, you can click on the Hide button to show the entire block session. You can also choose to delete an element temporarily. Regardless of your action, the changes won't be saved permanently unless you click the Save button at the bottom of this page. Same as before, if you leave the page without saving your change permanently, all the changes you've made will be lost. Now we want to talk about one special element only for the training session. After you add an element to a block in the training session, you will see another element type you can choose, that is, Random Recall Test. A random recall test is a memory recognition test in which participants are required to indicate whether a stimulus presented in this element is identical to the one presented immediately before the test or not. Chances are equal for the stimulus presented in the recognition test to be the last stimulus presented to participants or other stimulus randomly selected in the experiment. The purpose of this built-in memory recognition test is to help your participants focus on the training input. You can of course try to design your own task for the same purpose, but we hope to provide a useful tool that can help save some time for you. Let's walk you through the process of configuring this memory recognition test. First of all, when you switch the element type to random recall test, some element settings are set automatically. Collect responses, for instance, has to be checked, or the random recall test will be meaningless. Next, the response type is set to binary and cannot be changed. This is because the memory test naturally elicits binary responses, yes versus no, from participants, depending on whether the presented stimulus is the last stimulus that participants are exposed to before the test. And because the presented stimulus is selected automatically by Enigma, the correct response is also determined by Enigma, and that's why you cannot change the correct response column. Then you'll find that the Check Response Accuracy box is always checked, since this task is meant to test if participants pay enough attention to the training input and can thus respond correctly. To make this test work, you need to make changes to some crucial settings in addition to other basic settings like element onset and element length. First, in the stimuli type column, it is crucial for you to decide the stimuli included in this test. For instance, if your training input is from the text stimuli column in your stimuli list, then you should enter text stimuli in double square brackets in the second column of this setting and change the stimuli type to text. In each trial, then, Enigma will track the stimuli that have been exposed to participants and select the stimulus used in the random memory recognition test automatically. Next, in the response type and keys settings, the meaning represented by the binary response keys and prompt texts is fixed. The first response key and prompt text always correspond to the yes response in the test, and the second response key and prompt text always correspond to the no response. Thus, it is important for you to set these keys in text correctly. If you use no as the first prompt text, it could be misleading and perhaps none of your participants could pass this test at all. There are 3 other settings that are only specific to random recall test. One is random test interval, which determines how the random recall test is administered. For example, if you enter an interval of 4 to 7, it means the test appears after every 4 to 7 trials. This setting of randomness will make it more difficult for participants to predict the test timing, thus forcing them to pay close attention to the training input. The lower bound of the interval is 2, so you should at least enter interval like 2 to 4. This should be understandable since if the test is administered after just one trial, the correct response must be yes. Second, you can enter a text prompt in the random text prompt setting, which functions as a hint to inform your participants of the upcoming random memory test so they can be fully prepared. Then, in the random text prompt length setting, you can enter a number to determine how many seconds the text prompt will stay on the screen. The number cannot be set as -1, or the prompt will remain on the screen permanently and the experiment will not be able to continue. Well, that's all for the basics of experimental design in Enigma. We hope that this video is helpful to you as an experimenter on Enigma, but since it is not possible for us to cover every possible experimental design in Enigma, you're kindly invited to test its limit. If there is any question, please feel free to contact us. For now, have fun creating and designing experiments, and we'll see you around.